This episode of PWS United was recorded on July 21st, 2025.
Welcome to PWS United, a podcast for the Prader-Willi syndrome community, brought to you by PWSA USA. This podcast gives the latest news in research, advocacy, and family support by bringing together staff, volunteers, PWS treatment specialists, biotech and pharmaceutical representatives, caregivers, family members, and individuals with PWS. Our goal is to share education, awareness, and resources with those living with PWS and their supporters. Join us in our mission to enhance the quality of life and empower those affected by Prader-Willi syndrome.
So hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of PWS United, the podcast where we explore the latest news, research, and resources impacting those affected by Prader-Willi syndrome. I am Dorothea Lantz, PWSA USA's Director of Community Engagement, and today I'm honored to welcome two special guests from Soleno Therapeutics, Dr. Anish Bhatnagar, Soleno's CEO, and Kristen Yen, Senior Vice President of Global Clinical Operations. Now, as many of you know, Soleno Therapeutics recently received FDA approval for VYKAT XR, which is the first ever FDA-approved treatment for hyperphagia in PWS, a huge win for our PWS community. And today we're going to talk about that path to FDA approval, as well as Soleno's commitment to our PWS community and what happens next. So thank you so much for both being here with us today. And Anish, let's start with you and your journey. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what led you to Soleno?
Sure. Thank you, Dorothea, first for having us. And as to what led us here, I'm a physician by training. I have been in industry since completing my fellowship, which was about 25 years ago. My early work was in oncology, so the middle third of the work was in devices and diagnostics. And at the end of that time, I was looking at what to do next and landed on rare diseases as something that would be interesting. And in looking at unmet needs, in looking at things that were not solved, PWS was very high on the list. And we formed Soleno in 2017 to work on DCCR for PWS.
Great. So Kristen, now I'm going to throw it to you. What drew you to this work in clinical operations and rare disease advocacy?
Yes, thank you, Dorothea. And again, thank you for having us here today. So as I was completing my master's in cell molecular and neuroscience, I was deciding on whether I wanted to continue my education and get a PhD or take a break and work for a bit. I chose the latter and started working in clinical trial management. I was drawn to this because it combined the science and people. Little did I know at that time I was working on a career that led me to managing trials in rare diseases and specifically in PWS, which has been by far the most rewarding experience of my career. For me, the science was important and fascinating, but really it was the people in the PWS community that made it personal.
Thank you, Kristen. How is it that Soleno first became involved in the PWS space specifically?
So as we were looking at companies and assets in the rare disease space, we were looking at different diseases. And I remembered from my medical school days, I had seen a patient with PWS. And when we came across a drug called DCCR, which was in very early stages of development with a small amount of data, we started looking at it more carefully. We looked at hyperphagia as a symptom that is nearly ubiquitous in PWS and is something that has not been solved. And PWS as a disease, which first described in 1956, has still not been solved. So we were very interested. We spoke with families, we spoke with caregivers, we spoke with providers, and we realized that if we could make a difference here, this would really be meaningful. So we began these long-term partnerships, including with groups such as PWSA USA, which we think have been very instrumental in leading us to where we are today with PWS.
That's great. We know that clinical trials in rare disease are tough. Can you talk a little bit about some of the hurdles that Soleno faced throughout the process?
Yeah, and clinical trials just generally are tough. clinical trials in rare diseases are even more difficult and challenging. So, our first hurdle was getting the FDA to buy into our study design, our initial phase 3 trial. We proposed a single primary endpoint of change in hyperphagia as opposed to having two co-primaries, which would have included hyperphagia and weight. The FDA agreed to the single primary endpoint of change in hyperphagia, and we credit this due to the years of work that the advocacy groups did with the FDA, educating them on how life-threatening hyperphagia can be, and that the individuals with PWS can be hyperphagic and not necessarily be overweight or obese. Enrollment was another challenge. Many families were skeptical about enrolling their children with PWS into clinical trials at that time. Also, during the conduct of our clinical trial, at one point we were competing with 5 other biotech or pharmaceutical companies conducting a clinical trial in PWS. COVID was another huge hurdle that we had to overcome. We were very fortunate, we thought, that we completed our enrollment of January of 2020. However, we still had to complete the trial during the shelter-in-place initiative and requirement, and this affected our study visits for those who were still on study. We had to pivot, and we were lucky that we were able to finish the trial as planned, and we did this all remotely, but it did impact our results as we didn't meet our primary endpoint. So what we did is we analyzed our data up to the point when we were required to shelter in place and found that the study was positive based on the pre-COVID data analysis. Based on that and the anecdotes that we were hearing from families of our participants, that we knew that we had to continue on and find a way to get this drug approved by the FDA. So this brings us to one of the last hurdles in our DCCR clinical development program that we had to overcome, and that we made the decision to do a randomized withdrawal period. We knew that this was going to be a challenge to get our participants and their families to agree to participate in this randomized withdrawal, especially since all the participants had been on DCCR for at least 2 years, and some were on DCCR for over 4 years. So, with all these hurdles, we are forever grateful to the participants and families who participated in our clinical trials, especially those who participated in the RWT. And without that success of that trial and without their commitment, we would not have an approved drug today.
So you've spoken about some pretty tough times. And I think that everybody in our community who listens to this podcast will understand and relate to those tough times. How did you all, as a company and as individuals who have been so invested in research for PWS, how did you all stay committed throughout these tough times?
So these were interesting times in the world of PWS clinical trials, as you know. At the same time as we were running trials, there were 2 other large phase 3 studies also running, which failed. And that added to the list of trials that were failing. And at the same time as we were seeing the tough time of missing the primary endpoint on the clinical trial, we were also seeing the fact that patients were doing really well on our open label extension studies. So we felt like the unmet need remained. And probably the biggest part of staying through this in tough times was conviction. We believed that this was a drug that was doing good things, and it did not make sense to give up. So when you looked around, you saw all the other failures. When we saw a drug that was doing well, and when we saw the patients and families and caregivers and physicians who needed the drug, it made sense to continue.
That definitely does make sense. So, can you talk a little bit about the importance of advocacy in the clinical trial process?
I would say that advocacy has been absolutely critical in the clinical trial process, and that starts with educating the FDA on what the disease is about. And this started way before we were even contemplating early trials with DCCR. We know that some of the community advocates went and spoke with the FDA about what it means to be obese, not obese, hyperphagic, not hyperphagic. And as you know, it ended up with all the drugs being developed for PWS ending up in the psychiatry division, which was an interesting difference from prior times. So that was one. to all the education that you did with caregivers for trial participation is also absolutely critical for companies like ours to enroll the studies. You help us understand the lived experience of those who live with PWS because there's no other way for us to know it. So if it wasn't for the commitment of the PWS community, trials really would not be possible in the way that they're being done today. So thank you for helping ensure that the patient voice is central in all this work.
Yes, and we also took that patient voice. And when we were designing our phase 3 clinical development program, we always work closely with the members of the advocacy organizations to help us understand what were the biggest challenges, how could they actually be able to be compliant with study visits, what was going to be possible for them to do and not be overburdening them.
Right. So there seems to be a parallel between Soleno and our PWS parents and caregivers, and that's that no one ever gives up. Do you all see that connection?
We absolutely see the connection, and I would say you guys are better at it than we are. We try to be good at it, and I think that was definitely one of our biggest motivators in moving things forward. When we look at the resilience that you all have in living life on a day-to-day basis, what we did, I think, was important, but it was nowhere close to what you all do.
Yeah, and it was amazing getting to know this incredible community of advocates. I mean, the caregivers and their ability to educate, mobilize, and most importantly, stay hopeful, right? They showed us what true advocacy looked like. And to this day, they continue to inspire all of us at Soleno. And that's one of the reasons why we keep going.
You're reminding me of something that one of the adults living with PWS said at the adults portion of the conference that we just had in Phoenix, Arizona. And I was talking about Hunter, and I was talking about him using his talker and using that as an opportunity to have his voice heard. And one of the young ladies in the room said, "Don't ever stop having hope." And I looked at her and I thought, my gosh, so here's this room of almost 80 adults living with PWS. And here she is telling me, don't ever stop having that hope. And our individuals, our loved ones with PWS are amazing. So let's talk a little bit about what it was finally like to receive FDA approval on your end. I know what it felt like as a parent to finally receive FDA approval for the first treatment for hyperphagia and PWS, but what did it feel like for you all?
I would say lots of feelings. One initial one was relief that we were finally done with this ultra long clinical development program, but definitely overwhelming and emotional. It's something that we've all been trying to do for a long time. And in some sense, it was validating because, we'd been saying something for a long time and people didn't quite believe it. So it was validating when it all came true. So a milestone for everyone, first for the community, and definitely for us as well.
Yeah, for me, it was surreal. I mean, again, as Anish said, our journey began years ago, back in 2016, when we were looking at DCCR as an asset. And although I think we're very proud of what we accomplished, but we were certainly, and I personally was more excited for the individuals with PWS and their families, and especially for the clinical trial participants and their families and the commitment that they made and the dedication and everything that they gave up to participate in that clinical trial. And yeah, it was so rewarding that we were at that point. I mean, it made every challenging moment that we faced and every hurdle that we had to overcome so worth it.
Lots of tears at this end. We had some families call in and not say anything, just cry.
hmm
So, Dorothea, how was it for you to receive FDA approval?
I think a lot of the original feelings are some of the things that you all were feeling, right? There's that sense of relief. I jokingly and not jokingly, I told I don't even know how many families that if it didn't get approved, that I would hide under a rock for a few weeks and nobody would see me for maybe a month, and we wouldn't be having any conversations because I don't know how I would be able to face the community, let alone face myself in a mirror. But there was a moment, I wish I could have recorded it. We all have groups of parents that we communicate with on a regular basis. And that week, everybody's on pins and needles. Have you heard? Have you heard? Have you heard? March 26th rolls around. It's towards the end of the day. Get the email, and I go on Facebook, and I go into my messengers, and I start a video chat, and everybody was waiting. You knew that everyone was on pins and needles because this is a group of parents, group of moms, okay, one of the moms groups, and there's probably 25 people in this group, and it was boom, 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 and everybody started jumping on, and I didn't need to say a word. Nobody needed to say a word. It was a smile and tears, and everybody knew it happened, that it finally happened. And I wish that there had been a way to record that moment in time so that we could have shared that with you. It was truly amazing. And it was one of the most profound moments that I've had since working at PWSA. And it was just everybody knew. And it was the sense of relief, the sense of just sheer happiness. And then within 24 hours, everybody's, how can I get the drug? How can I get the drug? What is the drug going to cost? And it's spiraling into this beautiful moment of we finally have that first step. We finally have hope. So thank you for hanging in there.
Thank you for helping us.
All right, let's talk about access and affordability. So it was funny because within 24 hours of VYKAT XR being approved, our families are trying to figure out, how am I going to pay for this? What are we going to do? What is it going to cost? Am I going to be able to get it? Can you all talk a little bit about what Soleno has been doing and is continuing to do to ensure access to VYKAT XR and affordability?
Sure. So philosophically, we believe that anyone who needs VYKAT XR should be able to get VYKAT XR. They should not be denied VYKAT access based on cost. And we've done a lot of things, starting with, even before approval, educating payers about PWS. Obviously, they didn't know about it, but to their credit, they seem to understand it. We have created enough supply of drug to make sure that the issues that you might have faced with a situation like growth hormone don't arise again. We are committed to removing any financial barriers that come in the way of people. We have a great team working on our side, and we have a specialty pharmacy which is dedicated to this, which is not to say that there'll be no challenges, but it's to say that we will stand alongside you and help you get through all of those. I think what we are seeing today is a lot of interest in VYKAT. We're seeing a lot of receptivity from payers already, and we're continuing to do the work to see that it remains that way.
Anish, would you mind clarifying for our audience, when you were speaking to payers, who exactly are payers? Who are those people?
Good question. So payers are, think of them as insurance companies. They can be private insurance companies, or they can also be public payers. Public payers would be Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid, as you know, is by state. And part of what we're also trying to do is to work with you all to ensure that whatever is needed on the state level is something that we can provide help for as well.
So let's talk about the education piece of this, right? So we know that, and I think, I can speak to this as a parent, with the exception of maybe 2 doctors, I've had to do almost all the education about PWS to my son's physicians. How are you all working to change that? And what does that look like for you as a company working in this space?
As we've done throughout our clinical development program, we continue to listen to the patient voice and ensure that we are supporting the needs of the individuals with PWS and their families. So, knowing that, and we've heard that, right, from members of the community, that they do have to do a lot of education. So, for that, we've created disease education materials, which will be for physicians or other members of the medical community who may not be familiar with hyperphagia. So, providing them with materials, educating them on specifically hyperphagia and PWS. Our patient advocacy team has worked closely with the members of the PWS community to create an engagement guide, which is a guide intended to help families, caregivers, healthcare professionals, educators, and the general public foster an understanding of and respectful engagement with individuals living with PWS. And this is available for download online.
I will say that you, as families, have to continue the process as well. While we're going to try and do what Kristen has been saying, I think it's invaluable for the families to continue to educate providers.
Well, I will tell you both that at least in South Florida, your team is doing their job because I've had 3 of my son's physicians down here reach out to me personally about some of the education materials that they are receiving regarding VYKAT XR. So well done you. It's very exciting work. And you know what? I will say, I'm just gonna go off on a tangent here and just say that it is unusual to have a pharmaceutical company in any space do the type of work that you all are doing for our families and on behalf of individuals living with PWS. And I'm seeing it make a difference. So thank you so much for that. We have talked a lot about hope. What message would you like to leave with our families who are still holding out hope?
I would say never give up hope, because we were able to do what we did with VYKAT XR because of the motivation that you all provided to us. So this is not the end of the journey. This is just one stop along the way. We live in this age of such significant advances in science, and it feels like VYKAT XR is probably just the first of many to come. Someday there will be a cure. So the people who are holding out hope for a cure, I can tell you there will be one day. But until then, there will be a lot of other advancements which will continue to improve the lives of people with PWS.
So, the hope that has powered us has always been rooted in the strength of individuals with PWS, their caregivers, and their families. And all of us here at Soleno continue to be committed to the PWS community.
Anish and Kristen, we are truly grateful for the time that you've put into this innovative treatment and the work that Soleno does on behalf of our PWS community. You've helped to provide an incredible amount of hope for so many families, and thank you so much for your dedication and your commitment and for joining us today on the PWS United podcast. For those of you who would like to learn more about this FDA-approved treatment, you can visit VYKATXR.com or find the link in our show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of PWS United. If you want to learn more about Prader-Willi syndrome and how PWSA USA is making strides in advocacy, family support, and research, visit www.pwsausa.org. And while you're there, we encourage you to sign up for our Pulse email newsletter to stay informed about the latest news, resources, and events. Don't forget to subscribe to the PWS United podcast so you never miss an episode. Our team is always available to support families and their loved ones living with PWS 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can call us at 941-312-0400 or email info@pwsausa.org. Catch a new episode next Tuesday, and until then, have a great week.